Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining this webinar today. Before we get started, let's just make sure that everything is working fine. So could you please confirm, you can use the chat box, could you please confirm that you can hear me, that you can see me as well, and that you can see the PowerPoint that I have shared. You should be able to see the first slide. Is this okay? Sound okay? Video okay? PPT okay? Are we all good? All right. Perfect. Okay, it's almost too good to be true. I'm glad everything is working fine. Okay, so again, welcome to this online economics cafe, which is organized by the Professional Development Division of CAIE. And it is actually the first time for me to organize this type of webinar. So I'm very happy that I'm given this opportunity. And today and tomorrow, actually, because you know that this webinar is divided into two parts, because the content is a bit too wide to be covered within one single session. So we will meet again tomorrow at the same time, same place. And we will discuss economic efficiency from a teaching perspective. I will go through the objectives of this webinar, but let me just tell you why I decided to focus on this topic today. There are, let's say, three main reasons for which I believe that this webinar can really make a difference in your ability to teach this content. First, it is a topic that is tested almost every year in paper 3 and especially in paper 4 for A2. Almost every year there is an essay question about economic efficiency. A second reason for which I chose to organize this webinar on this particular topic, it's because it is the first topic that we teach in A2, and I assume that many of you will start teaching perhaps within 2 or 3 weeks. So this could be one way for you to gain confidence as you start this new academic year. And one third reason for which economic efficiency seems to be an interesting topic, it is because I did find it quite difficult to teach when I first started to teach A2. I found it difficult to understand various definitions that were given in different textbooks, and it really took me some time to really gain confidence myself when teaching this topic. So I want today to share some teaching strategies, some tips that will enable you to gain more confidence and to deliver your lessons about efficiency in an efficient way. All right, let's get started. Before we go through the content, let me just say a few words about myself. So my name is Sylvain Ours. Okay, that's me. I am 31 years old. I am originally from France. Perhaps you can hear that from my accent, from the city of Montpellier. I have a PhD in economics. I received it from the University of Montpellier in 2016, just before I moved to China. I have 8 years of teaching experience. I first taught at the university for 5 years back in France at both bachelor's degree and a master's degree, bachelor's and master's level. And since 2017, I teach A-level, AP and IFY economics in China. I first worked for 3 years in Xi'an, and now I have moved to Chengdu. I currently work at the Malvern College of Chengdu, and I teach IGCSE, AS, and A2 economics. I am the founder of the website EconDoctor.com, where I share resources, course material for different curricula, mostly PPTs, but also some videos, webinars. And I'm currently working on a textbook project that is called The Secrets of Economics Diagram. So for now, just a sample is available and it should be completed within a year. And of course, I will let you know as soon as it is made available. Okay, so of course, throughout my presentation, throughout this webinar, feel free to ask your questions or to make remarks. You don't have to wait until the end, so you can use the chat box, of course, or you could even unmute your mic if you want to talk to me directly for any remark, comment, anything or question that you would like to share with me. I see that Alice can't hear me. Is this okay for everybody else? Should be fine, right? Everything looks good on my end anyway. Okay. What are the objectives of this webinar? First, the main objective is really to boost your confidence when teaching economic efficiency. So you can really, feel comfortable when you deliver the lesson and have confidence in your teaching skills when you address this particular topic. It might also help you to further develop your understanding of the key concepts. I explained that sometimes different textbooks give different definitions, and it might be confusing even for teachers and even for experienced teachers. So hopefully this webinar will help you clarify your understanding of some key concepts. I will use this opportunity to share some teaching strategies that will facilitate your students' learning. This could be some activities, the way I structure the lesson in order for your students to understand these concepts in the best possible way, to provide guidance on how to structure your lesson. What should you do first? What should you do next to be able to provide and to organize your lesson in a coherent way? Introduce a set of activities that you can use in your classroom. And this is actually the first thing that we are going to do. I will introduce an opening activity that I have designed specifically for this webinar that you can use to approach economic efficiency in an intuitive way before you start giving some complicated or formal definitions about economic efficiency. Provide a set of examples that will enable your students to better support the key points, especially when they write economics essay. Providing example is very important. What else do we have? Highlight the content and skills that are critical to your students' success. There is a lot of information about economic efficiency, and you must be able to help your students to identify what is very important, what is tested very often in paper 3 and paper 4, and what can be left aside, what can be perhaps less important, especially for the lower ability student. You need to be able to provide this type of information. Help you identify the most common mistakes students make and endow you with the methods to prevent and correct these mistakes, also something that is critical for the success of your students. Give suggestions on how to take your students to the next level. You will see that some of the slides that I will discuss today have a red star at the top right of the screen that says one step further. All slides that have this one step further red star indicate that the content will not specifically be tested during the Cambridge examination, but the content can be useful for higher ability students, or especially those students who want to pursue economics study at the university. And also, I will use this webinar as the opportunity to share some healthy course material with you, especially when we will talk about how to review economic efficiencies. I will share with you a mind map, lesson plan, examples of homework that you can assign to your students, as well as the key to this homework. And at the end of this pair of webinars, we will have a Q&A session, and I will answer any question that you may have about economic efficiency. So as I said, this webinar is going to be divided into two parts. Today we do part A, tomorrow we'll do part B. Part A will start by this opening activity that I have called Where to Begin. Then I'll give a very broad definition of economic efficiency. And then of course, you know that economic efficiency requires two distinct types of efficiency, productive and allocative efficiency. So we will have a closer look at each of this concept of efficiency, and that's going to be way enough for today. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the trade-off between static and dynamic efficiency. We'll say a few words about Pareto optimality, and then this is when we will focus on strategies to review economic efficiency with your students, different strategies that you can adopt. And finally, we'll try to save 15 to 30 minutes for the Q&A session. So you can share any issue, any remark, anything that you want to better prepare yourselves before your lessons on economic efficiency. Okay, are we ready? Shall we start? Okay. Okay. Good. So where to begin? It's always a good idea to start with an activity that you can do with your students. And again, I have designed this one, especially for this webinar. So hopefully this is something that you will find interesting and useful. And I've called it Robinson's dilemma. And you can actually connect that with what you taught your students in AS when you taught the production possibility curve. Many teachers use the example of Robinson Crusoe on his desert island, and the only thing that he has is his own labor. That's the only resource that he has, and he has to decide what he is going to do with his own labor. Is he going to use it to catch fish, or is he going to use his labor and the time at his disposal to collect coconuts? That's a very classic example in economics. So you can build up this concept of efficiency on what you have already taught to your AS students. So here's the story. Here's how it goes. So Robinson Crusoe is a castaway on a desert island. Okay, that's here, poor guy, you see. So we do have a coconut tree, 2 coconut trees actually, and some fish. Well, they look like sharks, but that's fish anyway, right? So the only resource at his disposal is his own labor, which he can use up to 6 hours to produce 2 goods, fish and coconuts. So up to 6 hours, he could use less, right? Of course, he could choose to sleep for 4 hours and then only catch fish or collect coconuts for 2 hours. It's possible. Nothing forces him to use all the time at his disposal. And you see that this is going to be connected to productive efficiency, but it's too early for that. So the job that you can assign to your students is to ask them to use the following information. So the next slide will give you some figures. Use the following information to help Robinson decide how he should use the time at his disposal in order to maximize his total satisfaction measured by the total number of happy faces. Okay, that's going to be easier than a monetary value. Let's just count satisfaction as the number of happy faces. So you could get your students to work individually, but I think it's better to make them work in pairs or in small groups. This could be quicker for them to find the answer to this problem. So what information do we give to the students? You will give them information about basically the production function, Robinson's production function. So the relationship between the time that he allocates to the production of each good and the output that he can produce. Okay, so the first table is the production function for fish, and the second table is the production function for coconuts. So for example, if Robinson allocates 3 hours of his time to catch fish, he can catch 7 fishes. Okay, if Robinson allocates 5 hours of his time to collect coconuts, he will be able to collect 11 coconuts. Okay, so these are the 2 production functions that we will use to construct Robinson's production possibility curve. And then we give information about the benefits of consumption. So same thing, the left-hand side table will give us information about the benefit of consuming fish, and the right-hand side table gives us information about the benefit of consuming coconut. So you see that, for example, if I consume the first fish, this will provide a satisfaction of 3 happy faces. Second fish, 3 happy faces. Third fish, 3 happy faces. But then you see that the extra satisfaction that is provided by the consumption of each additional fish decreases. For the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th fish, it's only 2 happy faces. And this could be interesting to do that, especially to introduce the concept of a decreasing marginal utility. So it's a bit early in the syllabus, but this could be, let's just say, a hint that is going to help you and your students understand better this concept when you talk about consumer equilibrium. So on the one hand, you see that you have a diminishing marginal utility, but you don't even have to tell your students yet about that. On the other hand, you see that we have an increasing opportunity cost, because you see that, for example, the first hour that I allocate to catching fish, I can catch 3 fishes, but then the second hour, only 2, third hour, 2, fourth hour, 2, fifth hour, 2, and sixth hour, just 1. So we have an increasing opportunity cost when we choose to catch fish, and the same thing goes for coconuts. The first hour that I allocate to collect coconuts, I can collect 4 coconuts. Second hour, 4 extra coconuts. But then you see that each additional hour that you allocate to collecting coconuts only allow you to increase your production by 1 coconut. So when we will draw the production possibility curve, we can expect that it is going to be bowed out to recognize the fact that we have increasing opportunity cost. So let's do that first. Let's use this information to graph Robinson's production possibility curve. Okay, so we'll put fish on the horizontal axis and coconuts on the vertical axis. And using this information, it is really straightforward to look at all the possible combination where Robinson is going to use all the time at his disposal, 6 hours, between catching fish and collecting coconuts. So you only have these possibilities. So for example, let me go back a bit. If we allocate our time 50-50 between catching fish and collecting coconuts, I will have 7 fishes and 9 coconuts. So it's going to be right here, point D, right? 7 fishes and 9 coconuts. Okay, but these points that we have on the production possibility curve only represent the output combinations where Robinson allocates all the time at his disposal to the production of fish and coconut. As I said earlier, he could very well choose to sleep for 2 or 3 hours, right, during the day. And in this case, as you can imagine, the total production that he could achieve in one day, the quantity of fish and coconut, would be a point that would be below the production possibility curve. So for example, if he chooses to sleep 4 hours a day and goes fishing for 1 hour and collects coconut for 1 hour, he would only have 3 fishes and 4 coconuts. And if he chooses to sleep 2 hours per day and goes fishing for 2 hours and collects coconuts for 2 hours, he would only have 5 fishes and 8 coconuts. So you can represent these 2 points. Point H would be a point where he would choose to sleep 4 hours in the day, for example. And point I would be a point where he chooses to sleep 2 hours per day. So these 2 points, point H and point I, would be points such that Robinson does not fully use the resources at his disposal. He has 6 hours available to catch fish and collect coconuts. And this is what he would get if he does not fully use his resources. So remember what the objective of this exercise is. The objective is to help Robinson to allocate his time so he maximizes his satisfaction. Very intuitively, your students will be able to understand that if Robinson wants to maximize his satisfaction, it is impossible that the best solution is a point that is below the PPC. It is impossible, which means that if Robinson wants to maximize his satisfaction, he needs to use the entire amount of time at his disposal, 6 hours. He should not sleep, because if he chooses to sleep, he will not produce anything. And if he does not produce anything, he will have fewer coconuts and less fish to consume. This is how you can introduce the concept of productive efficiency in an intuitive way to explain to your students that if you want to maximize your satisfaction, you need to make sure that you don't waste resources. that you fully and efficiently use all the resources at your disposal. So we know that the best combination of fish and coconuts will be somewhere on the PPC, representing an output mix such that we don't waste resources. Okay, but which one? You see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possibilities. So then there is really the idea that beyond the requirement of not wasting resources, we also need to choose the combination of goods and services that are the best for us. So for example, if I am allergic to fish, I should probably choose combination A, right? And if I am allergic to coconuts, why not? I should probably choose combination G. So it really depends on our preferences, on our characteristics as consumers. And this idea of choosing the best combination of goods and services depending on consumer preferences is this concept of allocative efficiency. So let's try to find out between A, B, C, D, E, F, G, which one is best for Robinson. How we can do that? We can build this type of table. Each row represents one possible allocation of time. So for example, 0.6 means that I allocate 0 hours to catch fish and 6 hours to collect coconuts. 1.5, I allocate 1 hour to catch fish, 5 hours to collect coconuts. And then using the information that was given above, I can just calculate the quantity of fish and coconut that I am going to produce. Using this information, I can calculate the benefit that is measured in terms of how many happy faces do we have associated with each possible allocation of my time. Okay, so for example, if I choose not to catch fish at all, then I will not produce any fish. So I will not have any happy face coming from the consumption of fish, but I will have 12 coconuts. And using the information that was given above, I can identify that this will generate a total satisfaction of 24 happy faces. And I can do that for all possible combinations, all possible allocations of my time, and to calculate the total benefit that would be generated by the consumption of the combination of fish and coconut. And then the combination or the allocation of my time that is optimal, that will be allocatively efficient, is the one that will generate the largest number of happy faces. In this example, it would be by catching fish for 4 hours and collecting coconuts for 2 hours that I would maximize my satisfaction. So in this case, this allocation is productively efficient because I don't waste resources. You see, I have fully used the 6 hours that I had to my disposal. And it is allocatively efficient because it is the combination or the allocation of my time that provides the largest satisfaction, that enables me to produce the combination of fish and coconuts whose consumption will provide the largest satisfaction. So I think this opening activity can be useful in the sense that it really emphasizes that efficiency is about two different things. Productive efficiency, we need to make sure we don't waste resources, that we use all the resources at our disposal. And the concept of allocative efficiency, which is about, okay, we don't waste resources, but what do we produce? What we produce must take into account consumer preferences, and it must also take into account the cost of production. Okay, so I think it's a good way to introduce economic efficiency, and I am going to use it this year with my A2 students, and I encourage you to do the same. So now that students might have a pretty good intuition about what efficiency is, it's time to give some definitions. And in my opinion, the best way to start is to go back to the basic economic problem. Because efficiency really is about a solution to the basic economic problem. We have a problem, which is to determine how we allocate our scarce resources between competing uses. We can use our time to collect coconuts or to catch fish. These are competing uses in order to best satisfy people's needs and wants. If you want to achieve the largest satisfaction in society or in the economy, that's the basic economic problem. And to me, the easiest way to define economic efficiency is just to say that economic efficiency is a situation where the resources are allocated in the best possible way, or to put it differently, the resource allocation that solves the basic economic problem is economically efficient. So solving the basic economic problem does not mean to ignore it or how can I put this? To ignore it. The idea is that we find the best solution. So economic efficiency is achieved when an economy's scarce resources are used in the best possible way. It's not about bypassing the basic economic problem. It's about finding the best possible allocation of the economy's scarce resources. So you see that it is a pretty vague definition, of course. It is a vague definition. We will give more precise definitions when we give extra information about productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. Two conditions must be met, this we know, productive efficiency and allocative efficiency, good. The opening activity that I introduced should make sure that your students have a clear understanding of that, so we need to have both. Productive efficiency, we don't waste resources, we use them fully. So no resources should remain idle. Each resource should be used to its full potential and efficiently. So efficiently usually means that you must combine resources in the best possible way. You need to make sure, for example, that your workers are given the right capital equipment. If you give a hammer to a surgeon, well, it's probably not going to be very effective. If you give, I don't know, a pen to a carpenter, might not be very effective. A hammer would be more useful. So efficiently really is about how you combine your scarce resources to achieve the largest possible output. So that's productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency is about the output mix. What do we produce? We need to produce the combination of goods and services whose consumption provides the greatest possible satisfaction. Okay, so now that we have this broad introduction of economic efficiency, let's try to enter into the detail of each type of efficiency, productive and allocative. So you see this picture, I like this picture because to me it really is about the combination of resources. So we have this, this poor guy, is probably a logger, so his job is to cut trees. If you just give this tool to this guy to cut this big tree, I don't think we could call that a very good combination of scarce resources. I'm sure this guy could use a much bigger chainsaw to do the job. So this is one aspect of productive efficiency, to make sure that resources are combined in the best possible way. What is crucial to understand when we learn and when you teach productive efficiency is that there are actually two definitions that don't have much in common, simply because they are, you can define productive efficiency in an economy where you produce multiple goods, and you can define productive efficiency in a firm or in a market. And these definitions, even though they are both related to production and cost of production, they are quite different. So make sure when you teach that you separate the concept of productive efficiency in the economy and productive efficiency in a firm or in a business. So let's start with productive efficiency in an economy. The definition is extremely simple. For an economy, you achieve productive efficiency if you can't produce more of one good without producing less of another. That's a very straightforward definition. Your students will understand that with no problem. What diagram do we use to illustrate this concept? We use the PPC. All points on the PPC are productively efficient. All points below the PPC are productively inefficient. And everything that is above is unattainable, so it doesn't really matter. Question: when you graph the PPC, what do you think you should put on the axis? What labels should you put on the axis? There are several options, right? In some textbooks, they label the axis consumer goods, capital goods. This is what is the most common, but really it doesn't matter. It's okay if your students, they want to label good X on the horizontal axis, good Y on the vertical axis, good 1, good 2, or even to come up with example, wheat and corn, for example. It doesn't matter. We just need two goods. Could be a category of good, consumer goods or capital goods, but it could just be two separate goods. Doesn't really matter. Question 2, should we illustrate productive efficiency with a constant or increasing opportunity cost PPC? So in other words, when you graph the PPC diagram to illustrate productive efficiency, should we represent the PPC as a straight line, or should we represent it as a concave decreasing curve? Again, it doesn't matter. You could do both. It is true that increasing opportunity cost is usually considered to be more realistic. So that's why the typical PPC diagram are concave. They are not straight lines. But if your students represent the PPC as a straight line, it doesn't, it's not a big deal. No problem at all. What you could do with your students, after you have defined this concept of productive efficiency in an economy, you could ask them to discuss the possible causes of productive inefficiency. What can lead to a situation where the resources will be allocated in such a way that we do not maximize the production? So to put it differently, in which case could we be below the PPC? Could the economy produce a combination of goods that is below the PPC? It's a good debate that you can have, a good discussion that you can have with your students. So of course they will probably talk about unemployment. So not only labor, careful when you talk about unemployment, usually we often think of labor, but this could also be other factors of production. This could be a machine or a building, capital equipment, right? If a building is not used, this is unemployment. You do not use a resource, a factor of production. This could be a field. If there is a field in which nothing is produced, well, this is also an example of unemployment, when you do not use a factor of production that could produce goods and services. So that's one possible cause of productive inefficiency. You could also talk about X inefficiency, but I don't think your students know that yet, but you can tell them that when you will talk about market power, when you will talk about monopoly, you will see that sometimes the factors of production or the inputs that are hired by a business are not used to their full potential. And in this case, it may be well possible that you achieve a point that is going to be below the PPC. A last possible cause of productive efficiency, as I said, is if you do not combine your factors of production in the best possible way. Yeah, for example, if you just give this tool to this poor man, this guy is not going to be able to produce much wood or much timber, for example. So it can also be a bad combination of factors of production. You do not give the best capital equipment to your workers, for example. Good. This is how you can represent it. Here's a diagram. So everything on it is productively efficient. Everything below is not. And here's how you can use the diagram to emphasize the relationship between the diagram and the definition of productive efficiency in the economy. You can start from point A, a point that is below the PPC, and ask your students, is this possible when we start from point A? Can we produce more consumer goods? And usually your students say, yeah, of course, we can produce more consumer goods. And then you can ask them, okay, but do we have to reduce the production of capital goods to produce more consumer goods? And then they will think for a few seconds and they will tell you, no, we don't have to give up anything to produce more consumer goods. We could very well move from point A to point D, for example. We see that the production of consumer goods has increased, but the production of capital goods has remained the same. So at point A, it is possible to produce more of one good, consumer goods, without producing less of another, capital goods. Conclusion, point A is productively inefficient. You could do the same thing for capital goods. If we start from point A, is it possible to produce more capital goods? Yes, absolutely. And do we have to give up anything to do that? Do we have to reduce the production of consumer goods? No, we don't have to. If we move from point A to point E, for example, we get more capital goods without reducing the output of consumer goods. Conclusion, point A is productively inefficient. We could even move from point A to point B, for example, where you see that you can increase the quantity of both goods just to convince your students that yes, point A is productively inefficient. And then you can take a point on the PPC. And this is a bit more interesting. Then you can ask your students, if we start from point E, is it possible to produce more consumer goods? And some of them may tell you, no, it's not possible. But actually it is. Of course, if we start from point E, we can produce more consumer goods, but we will have to reduce the production of capital goods. For example, by moving from point E to point B. We produce more consumer goods. It is possible, but the only way we can achieve that is by reducing the production of capital goods. And you can do the same thing in the other way around. If we start from point D, can we produce more capital goods? Yes, of course, but this will be at the expense of the production of consumer goods. We will need to reduce the output of consumer goods. Okay. That's all your students need to know about productive efficiency in the economy. Definition and how we can use the PPC diagram to illustrate this concept of productive efficiency in the economy. Do you have any questions at that stage? Is this okay? Shall I move on? Okay. How about productive efficiency in a firm? So it is really different. For some time, I tried to understand if there was a relationship between the two definitions, PE in the firm, P in the economy, and I couldn't find any satisfying connection apart from the fact that they are both related to production. Yes, of course, but the two definitions do not have much in common. When you define productive efficiency in a firm, you will simply say that PE is achieved when the business produces at the lowest per unit cost. Be careful with something. Be careful if you want to use the concept of average total cost, because some definitions will just tell you this is when the ATC is minimized, because the cost curves are usually taught later in the A2 syllabus. Cost curves are taught when we study production in the short run, and this comes later in the syllabus. So if you use the word or the acronym ATC, some of your students might be unaware of what this means. So it might be better to use per unit cost, especially for those who study business, they know what per unit cost is. So that's the definition. How do we represent it graphically? PE is achieved when we are the lowest point of the ATC curve. So make sure that you explain that the ATC is the same as the per unit, okay, per unit cost. It's absolutely the same. Okay, not much to say. So that's what I wrote. Students may have not studied cost functions yet, so make sure you define the ATC. How about the shape of the ATC? Because you know that it is usually U-shaped. That's the typical shape of an ATC curve. Do you think it is the right time to explain the shape of the ATC curve? I don't think so. I think it's too early to explain why it has this shape, especially because at that stage, we don't know if this is a short run average total cost curve, a long run average total cost curve. We haven't taught economies and diseconomies of scale yet. We haven't taught the law of diminishing marginal returns. So for now, you can just tell them in economics, ATC curves usually have this U shape. We will see later why this is the case. Okay, you can just tell them that for now. And graphically speaking, how do we represent productive efficiency in a firm, it's a situation where we are at point A. So there are two things going on. The firm will produce the level of output that minimizes the ATC curve, and it will effectively produce this quantity of output at that minimum cost. Because this is not necessarily the case. Let me just so yeah, okay, if kids have IGCSE background, they will know what an ATC curve is probably. So it really depends on what the background of your students is, and you know better. So if you feel confident that your students are familiar with cost curves, then no problem. But if they have not studied IGCSE, or if you believe that they might have forgotten what an ATC curve is, be mindful when you teach this part of the syllabus. Something that I want to clarify is that it's not always going to be the case that if I produce this quantity of output, that my average cost is going to be ATC PE. It is actually possible, let me illustrate it. It is possible that, for example, if I, let me find what it is possible that when a firm produces the level of output QPE, oops, sorry. Let's call that ATC2. It is possible that the firm will fail to minimize its ATC when producing this particular level of output. So it is possible that when producing the productively efficient level of output QPE, it is possible that it will not produce it at the average cost ATC PE, which is the productively efficient average total cost, but at an average total cost that is going to be higher than that. There are two possible reasons. It's a bit advanced. I will just say a few words about that. You will see that the next slides have the one step further start. There are two possible causes where a business does not produce a given level of output at minimum ATC. The first problem could be technical inefficiency. And the second cause could be cost inefficiency. Technical efficiency, just to give a very simple summary, technical inefficiency is when you have hired a certain combination of inputs. You have, let's say, 10 workers, 5 machines, but you do not use them to their full potential. Perhaps they are a machine that can produce up to 1,000 toothbrushes per day, but it only produces 500 toothbrushes per day. Or perhaps you have one worker that could produce just 2 televisions per day, and it only produces 1 television per day. So technical inefficiency would be a situation where you have a certain combination of inputs, but they do not achieve their full potential. They do not produce to their full potential, and therefore your total output will be lower than what it could be. And if your output is lower than what it could be, your average cost is going to be higher than what it could be. So this is one possibility that we call technical inefficiency. The other possible problem that can explain why a business might be unable to produce a given level of output, QPE, for example, at minimum ATC, is what we call cost inefficiency. Cost inefficiency is when you do not combine your factors of production in the best possible way. When, for example, you use too many machines and not enough workers, or the opposite. Sometimes there are several ways, several possible combinations of inputs that we call input mix to produce the same level of output. All combinations will produce the same output, but they will lead to different costs of production. And your job, if you are a good manager or a good economist, is to choose the combination of inputs that will allow you to produce this particular level of output at minimum cost. We call that the cost minimizing rule. This is something that we study in the topic about production in the long run. But if you fail to combine your factors of production in the best possible way, if you do not implement the optimal input mix, then you will not produce a given level of output, QP, for example, at minimum ATC. Okay. So basically, if you want to achieve productive efficiency, if you are a firm, there are three things that you need to do. You need to produce this quantity of output, QPE, which is the one that minimizes your average total cost curve. You need to make sure that all your factors of production are used to their full potential. And you need to make sure that you combine your factors of production in the best possible way, that you have the best possible combination of capital and labor, for example. So this is a bit more advanced. So that's why if I move a bit, if I move a bit ahead, I give some extra detail about technical efficiency and cost efficiency, if you want to learn more about that. But you see the one step further star indicates that this is not going to be tested in A2. Technical efficiency is sometimes tested because when we fail, one reason for which a business can fail to achieve technical efficiency is when you have a big company with a strong market power that suffers from X inefficiency. X inefficiency is a particular example of technical inefficiency. So you can just tell your students that you will study that in further detail when you study a monopoly market. Cost efficiency, again, no need to give too much detail in the beginning because your students will better understand what this is about when you study production in the long run, when you have enough time to choose how many units of capital and how many units of labor you want to hire. So I will skip that today, but if you want to learn more about technical efficiency and about cost efficiency, how to define them, how to illustrate them, how to use diagrams to represent them, then feel free to have a look at the PPTs. I will send you the PPTs, of course. And there is an example with Huawei at the end, but this is a bit beyond the scope of the syllabus. All right, good. Any questions at that stage? We are done with productive efficiency. We are ready to start allocative efficiency. Is there any question about productive efficiency before we move on? Yes, I will send the extra PPTs. William, I'm not sure I understand your question. For productive efficiency, the only thing that matters is the ATC. So it doesn't really matter. It's not important to distinguish between fixed costs and variable costs at that stage. It's going to be important later in the syllabus. For example, when we study perfect competition, supply curves. It's going to be important when we study production in the short run versus production in the long run. But at that stage, when we talk about productive efficiency in a firm, in my opinion, there is no need to distinguish between the different types of average cost curve, ATC, AVC, AFC. Okay, allocative efficiency. I like this picture because you see that this is actually an artist that creates this artwork. I forgot his name, but you can probably Google it. And this artist is specialized in producing things that are useless. Of course, this tool is not going to help you to water your plants, of course. And this guy has created a very wide range of products like that you just can't use. Why did I choose this drawing to illustrate allocative efficiency? Because as I explained earlier, allocative efficiency really is about making sure that what we produce creates benefits. So if you produce this type of device, there could be an artistic benefit, but in terms of a practical use of this tool, the practical use is just, there is no practical use. So I found it interesting to illustrate allocative efficiency. So productive efficiency is quite easy to teach, in my opinion. You just separate productive efficiency in the economy, productive efficiency in the firm, the two diagrams. Okay, usually students, they do very well at understanding, explaining productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency is usually something that is a bit misunderstood And I find that textbooks do not usually explain things very clearly. So this is the last thing that we will do today. And I will try to explain allocative efficiency and to show you how I would approach it, how I would teach it to the students, so it is as easy as possible for them to understand this concept. And where would I start? To me, the best place to start to explain allocative efficiency is to go back to something that they have studied in AS, which is consumer surplus and producer surplus. They know what this is. You know what this is. So I'm not going to spend time to review what this is about, but you can just remind them. You see there is the reminder sign at the top right of the PPT, just to indicate that this is not something new. This is something that they know from AS. They know consumer surplus, they know producer surplus, so you can just remind them the definitions. And you can ask them, especially if they use mini whiteboards, and I hope you use mini whiteboards with your students so they can practice graphing skills during your lessons. If they have mini whiteboard, you can just ask them to represent a competitive market, supply demand, and to show consumer surplus and producer surplus when the market is in equilibrium. So you should get something like that, okay? Supply demand, so the demand is remind them that the demand measures the maximum willingness to pay of buyers, and remind them that the supply curve represents the minimum willingness to accept of sellers, okay? So you should have a diagram like that. It should be easy for all of them. Once you make clear that they remember what consumer surplus and producer surplus is, you can define total surplus. Total surplus, if I had a look at just to make sure at the AS syllabus, and I don't think total surplus is something that is introduced in AS. Once we have introduced consumer surplus and producer surplus, total surplus is very easy to introduce simply because it is the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So you can give more information about what it is. You can give examples, you can try to give the intuition about what it measures, the difference between the maximum willingness to pay, the minimum willingness to accept. You can remind them that here the price doesn't matter. The price is not important simply because the price is just a transfer between buyers and sellers, okay? That it measures the gain to the entire society. You can give an example, right? I came up with an example to illustrate the total surplus generated by one transaction. Then you can expand your definition to define total surplus in a market for a given number of units, okay? You can use some define total surplus graphically below the demand curve, above the supply curve if we are in a competitive market in equilibrium. You could even give the formula if you want to calculate it. And then once you have defined that, you can represent it graphically. Let's start with this one, sorry. You could say that, all right, consumer surplus was the upper triangle, producer surplus was the lower triangle. So if we add these two areas, we will end up with total surplus. So I really think that this is the best way you can start introducing allocative efficiency, and you will understand in a minute. You can even practice with them. You can just give them a particular quantity of output, Q1, just to help them identify total surplus. So if there are Q1 units traded in this market, where is the total surplus? Well, the first unit would generate this total surplus, the difference between the maximum willingness to pay and the minimum willingness to accept. The second unit will generate this total surplus. You see that the maximum willingness to pay is greater than the minimum willingness to accept. So if we trade this unit, total surplus will increase, and so on and so on. And overall, total surplus would be equal to this area if we produced and consumed this quantity. Okay, so if we produce and consume this quantity, obviously total surplus would be given by this area. And something that you could do that could be a bit more challenging, you could say, what if we produced and consumed this quantity, the quantity that is greater than the equilibrium quantity? So then you would tell me, yeah, but there is no price, there is no market price at which we would effectively produce and consume this quantity. Yeah, that's true. But you could just tell them, what if the government forced this level of production and this level of consumption. What would be total surplus? Well, at first, the maximum willingness to pay is greater than the minimum willingness to accept. So as we increase production and consumption, total surplus increases, boom, 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 boom. But then we reach this point. And this point is interesting because supply is equal to demand, which means that the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for one more unit is the same as the minimum price that sellers are willing to receive to sell one more unit, which means that if we sell one more unit, total surplus would be constant. Okay, so at first total surplus has increased, and then you see that it reaches some kind of maximum. And then what happens if we keep producing and consuming beyond this quantity? Then in this case, total surplus would start to fall because the maximum willingness to pay is lower than the minimum willingness to accept. So total surplus would start to fall, and overall total surplus would be represented by area A minus area B. Okay, you don't have to give so much detail. If you just want to say that total surplus is just consumer surplus plus producer surplus, it's fine. If you want to go a bit beyond that and give more detail, you can use these diagrams to help them understand how this works. Once you have given the definition of total surplus, it is going to be very, very easy to define allocative efficiency. The easiest possible way you can define allocative efficiency is just to say that in a market, allocative efficiency is achieved at the level of output, you can give it a name, QAE, for example, at which total surplus is maximized. This really is the easiest possible definition of allocative efficiency. We produce a certain level of output such that total surplus is maximized, which means that if we produce more or if we produce less, total surplus would be lower. That's it. Then, because your students will need a formula to identify, to know where this is. How do we know where this is? How do we know which level of output effectively maximizes total surplus? Well, the definition is very simple. This quantity of output is such that the marginal benefit of consumption is equal to the marginal cost of production. And I will explain that. I will give you the intuition, or I will suggest how you can explain this formula to your students in a minute. Just a small remark, short remark. You know that when just after the first topic in A2 is economic efficiency, the second topic is market failures and especially externalities. When we teach externalities, we distinguish between private cost, private benefit, social cost, social benefit. So you see that my definition here, it's not very clear because I don't know if the marginal benefit of consumption, if it's the marginal private cost, social cost, and same thing for the marginal cost of production. Sorry, is it the private benefit or social benefit? And same thing for the marginal cost. Is it the private cost or social cost? So the question is, should we clarify? Should we talk about social cost? Because of course, allocative efficiency is achieved when the marginal social benefit is equal to the marginal social cost of production. But I don't think it's a good idea to introduce the concept of private cost, social cost, private benefit, and social benefit at that stage, because we will study that when we introduce externalities. So in my opinion, it's better just to give this imprecise definition, just marginal benefit and marginal cost. And then when you teach externalities, so when your students understand the difference between a private and social cost or benefit, then you can go back very quickly to efficiency and say, hey, remember when we define allocative efficiency, we said marginal benefit, we said marginal cost, but is it private or social cost? Just to clarify this definition after you have introduced externalities. I think this is a better strategy for them to understand this concept. You don't want to introduce too much complicated things at the beginning. Okay, why is this the case? Why is total surplus maximized when the marginal benefit of consumption is equal to the marginal cost of production? Easy, and I'll get back to this in a second. Easy to understand. If, this is how you can explain it. If the marginal benefit of consumption is larger than the marginal cost of production, it means that the price that I will be willing to pay for one more unit which is my marginal benefit of consumption, is going to be greater than the minimum price that the seller is willing to accept to produce one more unit, the marginal cost. Which means that if we produced one more unit, total surplus would increase because the maximum willingness to pay is greater than the minimum willingness to accept. So in this case, if we want to improve allocative efficiency, we should increase production. We should allocate more resources to the production of that particular good or service. Okay, more resources should be allocated. And that's why we call that allocative efficiency. On the other hand, if the marginal benefit of consumption is smaller than the marginal cost of production, then the maximum price that I am willing to pay to buy one more unit of the good, which is equal to my marginal benefit of consumption, is going to be smaller than the minimum price that the seller is willing to accept to produce and sell one more unit, the marginal cost of production. So in this case, if we produced one more unit, total surplus would actually decrease. So if we want to improve allocative efficiency, we should produce less. We should allocate fewer resources to the production of that particular good or service. We should reduce production by, well, perhaps at least if we reduce by 1 unit, total surplus would increase. We should allocate fewer resources to the production of that particular good or service. What you can do, let me just move forward a bit. Something that I like very much to introduce allocative efficiency is to use these two diagrams that I put one over the other. The top diagram represents supply and demand. The supply curve represents the marginal cost of production. I will go back to this in a minute. And the demand curve represents the marginal benefit of consumption. If we are there, if we produce this particular quantity, where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit, total surplus is there, and total surplus is going to be maximized. So what you can do is something like that. On the bottom of your diagram, you draw another one that represents the total surplus. And you see that to the left of Q star, total surplus increases and it reaches a maximum at Q star, and then it starts to decrease after Q star. It increases before Q star, or to the left, because the marginal benefit of consumption is greater than the marginal cost of production. So if we produce more, if we allocate more resources to this particular market, then total surplus would increase. But then after Q star, to the right of Q star, my total surplus starts to fall simply because you see that the marginal cost of production is greater than the marginal benefit. It costs more to society to produce one more unit than the benefit that it generates. So if we allocate more resources and produce more units, overall total surplus would start to fall. So I think this is a good representation to illustrate allocative efficiency and to emphasize the relationship between supply, demand, marginal cost and marginal benefit, and total surplus. But then what happens? What happens if we do not achieve allocative efficiency? Perhaps we don't have the right quantity. This is what we call a market failure. If we allocate too many resources to the production of one particular good or not enough, what's going to happen in this case? If the level of output is different from QAE, so we have allocative inefficiency, then total surplus is not maximized. We could do better. And how do we call the difference between the maximum possible total surplus that we could achieve and the total surplus that we currently have? Well, the gap is what we call the deadweight loss. So the gap is just, the deadweight loss is just a loss in total surplus that is the consequence of an inefficient allocation of the resources. How can we represent the deadweight loss in my diagrams over here? So for example, what if we are there? We know that the allocatively efficient level of output is Q star. Okay, this is at this quantity of output that total surplus is maximized, yes. But at Q1, which is a lower level of output, I see that total surplus, which is represented by the gray area, is not as large as it could be. It could be equal to the big triangle, right? If we increase production, if we produced Q star, total surplus would be equal to this big triangle. So there is a loss in total surplus. The loss in total surplus is represented by this small triangle that we call the deadweight loss. Why do we have a deadweight loss? Simply because at Q1, you see that the marginal benefit of consumption, MB1, is greater than the marginal cost of production, MC1. So if we allocated more resources to the production of that particular good, total surplus would increase and the deadweight loss would decrease. Can we identify the deadweight loss in the bottom diagram? Yes. This is the maximum possible surplus, TS star. This is the total surplus that is generated when we achieve allocative efficiency. This is the total surplus that is generated at Q1. The deadweight loss is just the difference between the two. So I really believe that this combination of diagram can help your students to better understand how what allocative efficiency is about. So this diagram, or this pair of diagrams, represent what we call an under provision, when we have not allocated enough resources to the production of a particular good or service. But I could do the other way around. I could do this case where instead of having not enough resources being allocated to the production of the good or service, we have too much. We produce Q2. When we produce Q2, total surplus is equal to A minus B, as I explained before. And the deadweight loss is equal to area B. I think you get it by now. Why do we have a deadweight loss? Simply because at Q2, the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit, which means that we could increase surplus by total surplus by reducing production. Can I identify this deadweight loss on this diagram? Absolutely, same thing. This is TS star, the maximum surplus that I could achieve, that the market could generate. And at Q2, this is the total surplus that we achieve. It is lower than T star, and the gap is equal to the deadweight loss. A conclusion that is interesting is that when we achieve allocative efficiency, right here, there is no deadweight loss because we maximize total surplus. So this is, you can please emphasize that to your students. When we achieve allocative efficiency, total surplus is maximized and therefore there is no deadweight loss. This is what I say is there. There is no deadweight loss in a market that achieves allocative efficiency. Okay, we are almost done. I hope you're still alive. Question, we will be done in 5 to 10 minutes. Question, is it correct to state that allocative efficiency is about allocating resources to the production of goods and services that are the most wanted by consumers? Do you think it's correct? Because I have seen that in some textbooks. Do you think it is a statement that makes sense? That we should allocate resources to produce what people really want? That's the only requirement, that the only criterion that we should follow in order to achieve allocative efficiency. It may make sense, but it's incorrect. Of course, we have to take into account what people want. And that's why the formula of allocative efficiency takes into account the marginal benefit of consumption, obviously. But we also need to take into account the costs of production. So we cannot ignore it. In the statement here, we produce goods and services that are the most wanted. This suggests that the only thing that is important is the benefit of consumption. It is one important criterion or one parameter that we must take into account if we want to achieve allocative efficiency, but we must also take into account the cost of production, which means that if there is a product that is very highly valued by consumers, but that is very, very expensive to produce, we might very well choose to allocate very few resources to the production of that particular good or service. And on the other hand, if you have a good or service that is not very highly valued by consumers, they have a low benefit of consumption, but if it is very cheap to produce, if it has a very low opportunity cost, then you might very well achieve allocative efficiency when allocating many, many resources to the production of that particular good or service. What about externalities, David? Well, we'll see during the next webinar. The next webinar that I will organize will be about externalities and market failures in general. So you will have to be a bit patient until we schedule this next webinar. Something else that I want to say that to me is very important, probably one of the most important things that I want to say about efficiency. It's the last point here. Many textbooks define allocative efficiency as a situation in which the price is equal to the marginal cost. So marginal cost of production, you see that's the same, but instead of stating that it's going to be the marginal benefit of consumption, they say that it is the price. And I really think that this is not a clear way to define allocative efficiency, in particular because the price is not really the market price. The price is the demand price. For example, let's go back to this diagram over here. This one. We agree that Q2 is allocatively inefficient, right? It is, you see that we produce too much. There is a dead weight loss. I have identified it. So at what price, at what market price can we achieve this level of production? Think about it. At what price can we achieve this level of production? Some of you might say that it's going to be here, right? This value. If the price is equal to MB2, then we would produce this quantity here. But of course not. If we charge a price equal to MB2, we would be in a situation where the market would be in disequilibrium. We would have an excess demand, and the quantity that would be effectively traded in the market would be right here, right? Would not be Q2. So we have to be careful with that. In particular, there is no market price that can lead to a situation where we produce Q2. It's impossible. There is no market price, generally speaking, there is no market price that can be such that the quantity produced in the market is greater than Q star. Impossible. There would be excess demand. So of course people would like to buy Q2, but firms would only want to produce this quantity. We would have excess demand, and we would not trade Q2, we would trade this quantity there. So when they say, when you have these textbooks, they say allocative efficiency, it's when the price is equal to the marginal cost. Be very careful. The price here does not mean the market price. It is the demand price. The demand price is the maximum price that consumers are willing to pay for a given quantity. And it is true that the demand curve, or if you put it differently, the demand price is given by the demand curve. So for example, if you look at Q2, yes, the maximum price that consumers are willing to pay to purchase this quantity is indeed MB2, but this is not a market price. Okay? So again, I recommend you avoid this definition with students, and I just think it makes way more sense to just say allocative efficiency. It's when marginal benefit of consumption is equal to the marginal cost of production. In a competitive market, the marginal cost of production is given by the supply curve. In a competitive market, the marginal benefit of consumption is given by the demand curve. Why? Okay, that's going to be my last point for today. Why is this the case that the supply curve is the marginal cost and the demand curve is the marginal benefit? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, this is what I explained there. Simply because buyers in a market, they will purchase or demand a product as long as their marginal benefit of consumption is greater than the price. If my benefit of consuming one more unit has a value of $20 and the price is only $16, I will increase my consumption. So I will stop consuming when my marginal benefit of consumption is exactly equal to the demand price. Okay? So that's how you can explain it. That's why the demand is equal to the marginal benefit of consumption. Same thing for supply. Why is the supply curve equal to the marginal cost of production? Because sellers, they will increase the amount they produce and sell as long as the market price is greater than their marginal cost of production. That's all. That's the simple version to explain why demand measures the marginal benefit of consumption and supply measures the marginal cost of production. If you want to get into more details, I have created a few extra PPTs, extra slides. You see the one step further star that gives more information, that gives detailed explanation of why the demand is the marginal benefit and why the supply is the marginal cost, but it is probably a bit too advanced for the students. Okay, and I am done with allocative efficiency. Do you have any questions about allocative efficiency at that stage? So sorry, let me go back a bit, have a look at the chat box because I did not read everything. So no, next webinar, not tomorrow's. Tomorrow's webinar is going to be about efficiency, but there will be other webinars organized by Cambridge in the future, other economics cafes, and what I have in mind would be to schedule another economics cafe about market failures. So I will talk about externalities. I don't know yet when this is going to be. Redzino, it is also in CAIE mark scheme. You mean, what do you mean? The definition of allocative efficiency?
Yes, the definition of allocative efficiency.
Okay, so for CAIE, if your students, if they state that allocative efficiency is when the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost, it's perfectly fine. They will not lose marks at all, and because this is a correct definition, so there is no problem at all. And actually, this is less misleading than using the definition such that the price is equal to the marginal cost. You can't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake if you just follow marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost. And if you remember that the marginal benefit is the demand curve and the marginal cost is the supply curve. You will never make a mistake this way.
What if it is price is equal to marginal cost? What we will do then?
Okay, so if you see, for example, a multiple choice question where they say about efficiency, and they say something about price is equal to marginal cost, you just have to remember that the price here is the demand price. That's it. This is not a market price, this is the demand price. So if you have an MCQ where they give you several propositions, if they ask you something like, in which case is allocative efficiency achieved, and they give you several false or wrong propositions, and they give you one that says, when the price is equal to marginal cost, you must choose it as the right answer, but just tell your students that the price is the demand price. This is not the market price, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Let me have a look at the other questions. After we told about equilibrium, for one good, let's. Aha, can we use the PPC to illustrate allocative efficiency? That's a good question, and I have the perfect activity for that. Just give me a second, William, and I will use this activity to show you. About productive efficiency, according to the official mark schemes, production efficiency has nothing to do with the quantity of output that a firm produces, even if the firm chooses the quantity not at the lowest point of ATC to achieve PE, as long as its average cost is not above the long run ATC. The diagram is with ATC is minimized. Okay, okay. Yes, okay. It is a problem. I agree. I know exactly what type of MCQ you are referring to. I forgot which year this was, but there was a multiple choice question where they represented a long-run average total cost curve, several short-run average total cost curves, and they represented the point that was not minimizing the long-run ATC, that was below the minimum efficient scale, but that was above the long-run ATC. And the question was, is it productively efficient or not? And in this case, it's true that this was very misleading, and we had many conversations on WeChat groups, even on the Cambridge discussion board, because this did not seem to be very coherent with definitions in textbooks. So my assumption is that this type of very misleading MCQ was just a one-time thing. and I just hope that they will not, again, use this type of questions that can be very misleading, especially because different textbooks will have different understanding. All right, thank you for the information. Different understanding of the definitions of productive efficiency. But really, I think this is just a one-time thing. I just think this happened once, where there was one MCQ that was a bit ambiguous. We can talk about this particular question tomorrow during the Q&A session. We can talk about this particular problem tomorrow during the Q&A session, because I think it's important to address that so everyone is very clear on that particular point. Okay. All right, just to answer William's question, let's have a look at one activity, which is about, can we use the PPC to illustrate allocative efficiency? Is this possible? No. The PPC can only illustrate productive efficiency in the economy, but it can't illustrate allocative efficiency unless you are given more information about what people want, about consumer preferences. We can have a look at this diagram, for example, where we would be in an economy where we could only produce running shoes, size 36 running shoes, and size 43 running shoes. So basically, size 36 are mostly made for women, and size 43 would be mostly made for men. Okay. So we have a PPC, and let's have a look at these three possibilities. What you can ask your students is which of these points A, B, C are productively efficient? The answer is all of them. Point A, point B, point C are all productively efficient. Absolutely. They are on the PPC. Which ones are allocatively efficient? We don't know. We don't have enough information to determine which point is the best. So intuitively, we are inclined to believe that point B is probably the best. Assuming that you live in a country where you have as many men as women, and that they have the same tendency to run, then we would need as many shoes for women and as many shoes for men. So it seems tempting to say that point B is the one that is the most likely to be allocatively efficient. But again, if it really depends on where we are. If we assume that we are in a country where there are only men or very, very few women, then in this case, it's likely that point A will be the best. Yeah. And if we live in a country where there are almost only women, then point C would be the best. So if you just look at the PPC, you don't have enough information to determine which of this combination is allocatively efficient. So in terms of economic efficiency, we don't know. What type of information do we need to help us identify which one is allocatively efficient? To find out, we can use the next example, which is about berries and rabbits. So you are in the forest, and well, you can produce rabbits, you can hunt rabbits, so you can collect berries. So here's my production possibility curve. Same thing, which one of them are productively efficient? All of them, no problem. Which one is allocatively efficient? I don't know. I don't know. Simply because if I look at this PPC, I can compute the marginal cost of production, no problem. For example, if I produce the first rabbit, what is the cost of production? The cost of production is that I have to give up one berry from 21 to 20. So that's my marginal cost of production. What is the marginal cost of producing the second rabbit? It's going to be 2 berries. I have to give up 2 berries. That's my cost of production. What is the marginal cost of producing a third rabbit? 3 berries, what I have to give up. So a PPC allows you to calculate the marginal cost of production. But since allocative efficiency is about marginal cost of production is equal to marginal benefit of consumption, I don't have enough information about the marginal benefit of consumption, and therefore I don't know which point is allocatively efficient. So I can compute the marginal cost of production in terms of how many berries I have to give up to hunt each additional rabbit. So the PPC gives me that information, no problem, but I don't have information about the marginal benefit of consumption. What if I give you that information? Let's say I give it to you. I give you the information about your benefit, the benefit that you enjoy from consuming rabbits, from eating rabbits. And same thing, this marginal benefit is going to be measured in terms of berries. So for example, the benefit you receive from eating the first rabbit will be equivalent to 6 berries, equivalent to eating 6 berries. The benefit you receive from eating the second rabbit is equivalent to consuming 5 berries. Okay, so I give you information about the marginal benefit of consumption. It's not given by the PPC. I just add it ex nihilo. If I give you this extra information, then I can tell you which combination of berries and rabbit is allocatively efficient. I can bring together my two diagrams. I had one diagram that shows the marginal cost of producing rabbits. I have this second diagram that shows the marginal benefit of eating rabbits. And if I bring together these two diagrams, then I can tell you which combination is allocatively efficient. Should we hunt and eat the first rabbit? Yes, because the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. Okay, this can increase my satisfaction. Should I hunt and eat the second rabbit? Yes, because the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. Same thing for the third rabbit, MB is greater than MC, but you see that I should stop here. Because if I hunt and eat the fourth rabbit, my marginal cost, the number of berries that I have to give up, is greater than my marginal benefit, the equivalent number of berries that I enjoy from consuming the fourth rabbit. So my conclusion is that it is when hunting and eating 3 rabbits that I maximize my total surplus. So this is allocative efficiency. So if we go back to the PPC, it is when actually I think I have it later. Yes. It is when eating 3 rabbits and then I can collect 15 berries that I will achieve allocative efficiency. So this point D, is productively efficient. It is on the PPC, and at the same time, it is allocatively efficient. All the other points are productively efficient, even point G, sorry, but they are allocatively inefficient. If I start from point A, you see that I can increase my surplus, my satisfaction, by moving down the PPC, because the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, from A to B, from B to C, from C to D. But then if I move from D to E, my total surplus would start to decrease because the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit. So conclusion, can we use the PPC to illustrate allocative efficiency? Yes, if you are given information, extra information about the marginal benefit of consumption. All right. Let me go back to the chat box. In terms of A-level WeChat groups, so we can discuss about problems. I have created, so there is the Cambridge group. I think that it's a really active and great WeChat group. There are so many economics teachers in China. There is currently, let me have a look right now, there are 316 members. So that's probably the best place to talk about teaching issues. I have also created a WeChat group that is called EconDoctor. So currently we have almost 200 members. So that can also be a good place to talk about teaching issues. There is information to find resources on my website at the bottom right of that screen, EconDoctor.com. There are many resources. What else? Can we combine the idea of PE in an economy and PE in a firm with the concept of technical efficiency, because in the concept of technical efficiency, it is mentioned that the resources are not used in their full potential. It looks quite similar. Okay. Yes, to that extent, you're right. You can very well say that if you do not have technical efficiency, if there are some resources that you do not use to their full potential, then you will not achieve productive efficiency in a firm, and you will not achieve productive efficiency in the economy. In the economy, this will be represented by a point below the PPC, and in a firm, this would be represented by a point above the ATC curve. You would be at some level of output, but you would not produce that particular level of output at minimum ATC. You would produce it at a more than necessary average cost of production. So technical inefficiency can be used to explain productive inefficiency in an economy or in a firm, absolutely. But yes, PE in the economy is when you can produce several goods. So when you produce more of one, you have to give up the other. And PE is usually, in a firm, it's usually one single good. We don't consider businesses that can produce several goods and services. Would be a bit complicated. Yeah. So can we say one of the points on the PPC is allocatively efficient? It's a good question. Is this only one? I think usually it is. It really depends on the shape of your PPC, and it depends on the shape of the demand curve. So it depends on consumer preferences, and it depends on the production function. But so I don't want to say something that is not correct, but I would say intuitively that if you have a marginal cost of production that is always increasing, and if you have a marginal benefit of consumption that is always decreasing, then I'm pretty sure that among all the possible points on the PPC, all of them being productively efficient, I'm pretty sure that only one of them will be allocatively efficient. Yeah. But you might have some weird shapes. You could have a marginal cost that will be constant and a marginal benefit that may be constant over some range of output, some weird mathematical shapes or definitions, where you could have several points that would be allocatively efficient. But the general case, or the easiest possible case, where your MC is just increasing and the marginal benefit is always decreasing, I'm pretty sure that you would have one single point that would be allocatively efficient. Okay. Can I share the economics WeChat group? Yes, sure. I don't really know how to do that right here. Sorry about that. Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to add the QR code to include it to this PPT. So then tomorrow when I make the part B of this webinar, you can scan the QR code, okay? And you can join the WeChat group. I will provide the QR code tomorrow if it's okay with you. In an MCQ, there is an option that's saying all factors of production are fully employed, which is wrong. Is it because it does not mention fully and efficiently? I don't have enough information to answer to that question. What is the question precisely? If you want to achieve productive efficiency, you need to have all factors of production fully employed, absolutely. But I don't know what the question is precisely. So if you can give me more information about the MCQ, perhaps I can understand what the problem is. From where we can access the PPT. So this PPT is not yet made available. I will share it with you along with many other resources, mind maps, homework, and so on after tomorrow's webinar. I will share it directly on my website. I will give you the link tomorrow and you will be able to download all these resources. Which conditions define productive efficiency? Okay, all factors of production are fully employed. All firms are producing at their profit maxi. So B is obviously wrong. There are no further opportunities for substituting capital for labor. C is obviously wrong. The output of all goods is produced at the lowest possible cost. So if you're saying that A is wrong, it probably means that D is the right answer that is given by the mark scheme. Well, A is true. It's a requirement to achieve productive efficiency. I think this question is a bit misleading, because fully employed, absolutely. If you have resources that are unemployed, then you will not maximize your output and you will not achieve productive efficiency. Perhaps A is incorrect, because as you said, because they do not say that the resources have to be efficiently used, that they have to be combined in the best possible way. But it is a bit tricky, and I think many students probably made that mistake, because it's quite close to the truth. All factors of production are fully employed. It is a requirement to achieve productive efficiency. I guess the person who wrote this question probably had in mind that this is a necessary condition, but this is not a sufficient condition. The output of all goods is produced at the lowest possible cost. When you think about it, it should be the lowest possible average cost. Because if you want to produce at the lowest cost, you should not produce anything. So again, yes, there are some MCQs that are a bit ambiguous, and I'm sorry I can't give you a very precise explanation of why A is wrong. Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's necessary but not sufficient. What we have to keep in mind is that writing MCQs is very difficult, and sometimes there are some propositions that may be a bit ambiguous, and I do think that this question is indeed a bit ambiguous. Could you not say, though, that although all factors of production are employed, it does not necessarily mean it's been done efficiently? Yes, you could say that. You could say that, okay, you have used all your factors of production, but again, if you give a chainsaw, or let's put something differently. If you give a chainsaw to a surgeon and a scalpel to a carpenter, you have used all your resources, but you have not allocated them in the best possible way. You have not given the best capital equipment to the best workers. So the combination is not optimal, and therefore you do not achieve productive efficiency. So that may be one explanation, absolutely. But yeah, sometimes myself, there are some MCQs where I really have to think about it more than twice to try to figure out, well, what the answer is and what's the trick, what's the trap. Something that you should always do with your students is, of course, not only to tell them which answer is the right answer, but really to try to explain to them why each other proposition is wrong. Absolutely. Okay, any other questions? Sorry, it's been a long part A, but I hope you found it interesting. I hope you learned a few things, or I hope that this is going to help you to feel more confident about teaching efficiency. Any other questions that you may have? So of course, I had to go a bit fast because there is much to cover, but if you want to know more, if you want me to talk about some specific issues, topics in further detail, you can just talk to me. You have my contact information. Could be easier to take the time that is necessary to go into detail. Talk about some things that I have only mentioned quickly today. All right, if there are no more questions, we'll stop here for today. So tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll talk about the trade-off between static and dynamic efficiency. We'll talk about Pareto optimality. We'll talk about what strategies you can use to review economic efficiency with your students. And we'll just stay there to answer any question that you may have. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the day and see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye, everyone.